Welcome, and take a deep breath. Let the noise of the day, the hum of traffic, the glow of your screen, the soft flicker of modern life fade gently away. You're here now, in a quieter place, a slower place. Before we begin, take a moment to make yourself comfortable. Lay back. Let your shoulders loosen, your eyes grow heavy. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to this channel. It helps more than you might think. Every week, we wander through time together, quietly, calmly, exploring forgotten worlds, small details, and long silences that history has left behind. If you enjoy drifting to the sound of old stories, this is your corner of calm in a loud, restless world. Tonight, we return to the ancient city of Constantinople, a city so magnificent, even its ruins still whisper of glory. Imagine standing on the shores of the Bosphorus. The sea glimmers in the twilight, dark, blue, and gold. Across the water, the great dome of Hagia Sophia catches the last light of the day. Ships drift lazily through the strait, their sails pale against the fading sky. The air smells faintly of salt and incense, mixed with the distant sound of bells. This is the Byzantine Empire at its height, a world balanced between heaven and earth, where emperors rule by divine right and faith seeps into every stone and breath, where marble streets echo with the footsteps of scholars, merchants, soldiers, and far from the city's noise, on lonely hillsides, monks whisper their prayers to the wind. Tonight, we will follow those whispers. We will enter the lives of men who gave up everything: wealth, comfort, family, to live in silence and devotion. We will walk through the echoing corridors of monasteries carved into the hills of Cappadocia, and through candlelit halls, where emperors like Justinian and Theodora reshaped an empire. We will gaze upon the shimmering icons that divided faiths and fueled revolutions, and we end our journey in the marble heart of the great palace itself, a place of mosaics, secrets, and loneliness. So, let your mind slow down. Let the present slip away like mist. The past, calm, steady, and unhurried, is waiting. Let us begin with the quiet life behind the monastery walls. Imagine waking not to an alarm, but to a single, distant bell. It rings once, twice. Its sound rising from the darkness before dawn. You open your eyes to a world of stone. The walls are cold, damp with the breath of the sea. Your blanket is coarse, your bed nothing more than a board laid across two bricks. Outside, the sky is still black. The stars hang over the hills, motionless and sharp. You put on your robe, thick, rough wool that smells faintly of smoke and age, and join the line of hooded figures walking silently toward the chapel. No one speaks. There are no greetings, no glances exchanged, just the soft rhythm of feet on flagstones, the sound of the sea beyond the walls, and the flicker of a single oil lamp ahead. Inside, the air is thick with incense. The chapel is small, its ceiling low, its light dim. Gold icons shimmer faintly in the candlelight, their painted eyes following you as you kneel. A faint chant begins, deep and slow, like the breathing of the building itself. It is, in Greek, the language of heaven here, and it fills the silence with a low vibration that seems to hum in your bones. This is how every day begins. Not with the sun, but with prayer. Not with warmth, but with surrender. The life of a Byzantine monk was not peaceful in the way we imagine. It was quiet, yes, but it was a quiet born from struggle. A struggle against hunger, cold, and the constant pull of thought. In the monastery, the body was an enemy to be subdued. Sleep was kept short, food kept plain, comfort kept distant. They believed that through denial, the soul might grow clear, like a still pool reflecting heaven. Breakfast, if it could be called that, came after the third hour of prayer. A small bowl of lentils, a crust of dark bread, sometimes a few olives, or a slice of dried fig if the season was kind. No meat, no indulgence. Wine was only allowed for the sick, and even then, watered down until it barely stained the cup. Each meal was eaten in silence. While the monks chewed slowly, one of them chosen by the abbot would read from the Psalms or the lives of the saints. His voice was calm, unbroken, steady. The others listened, eyes downcast, hands folded. It was not a meal. It was a ritual, a rehearsal of humility. Work followed prayer, and every task was part of worship. Some tended gardens of herbs and figs, others copied manuscripts. The ink gliding across parchment in the half-light, each letter written carefully, perfectly, as though each stroke might be read by God himself. There were also carpenters, beekeepers, and cooks. Though cook was a generous word for a man who boiled the same soup day after day, without spice or oil. They built their own furniture, wove their own robes, and repaired their own roofs. The sound of hammers and brushes was their form of music, steady, repetitive, without beginning or end. And through all of this, the rule was silence. A monk spoke only when necessary. Speech was considered dangerous, a door to vanity, gossip, or pride, so they lived in near total quiet. Only prayer broke the stillness, prayer and the distant cry of gulls beyond the cloister walls. When night fell, they gathered again in the chapel. Candles flickered. The air smelled of beeswax and smoke. The chants began once more, low, slow, rhythmic. It was not music meant to stir emotion, but to erase it, to still the self. Sometimes, during these endless nights, a monk would fall asleep while kneeling. The body would sag. The candlelight would blur. Then a bell would sound again, not harshly, but like a reminder. Wake and return. Always return. Illness was common. Malnutrition, infection, exhaustion. They came quietly, without complaint. But the monks believed that pain was not a curse. It was a teacher. A small doorway toward understanding the suffering of Christ. And yet, not every monk found peace. There were moments of doubt, long hours when the silence grew heavy, when the mind whispered temptations of the world outside, of food, of laughter, of touch. Some ran away in the night, vanishing into the hills. Some confessed their weakness and began again. Weak humility most simply endured, not because they were saints, but because endurance was all they knew. If you could walk among them through the stone corridors, past the cloisters lined with creeping ivy, you would not find misery. You would find stillness, a rhythm that moves so slowly it almost feels eternal. The sound of turning pages, the scratch of a quill, the low hum of prayer drifting through the wind, the light of dawn spilling gently through a narrow window, gilding the dust that hangs in the air like smoke. And perhaps, as you stand there, listening, you would begin to understand why they stayed, why they traded the noise of the city for the silence of these walls. Because in that silence, in the hunger, the discipline, repetition, they found something the world could not offer. A glimpse of eternity. Pause. Now, let the chanting fade. The bells fall silent. The sea breathes softly against the distant cliffs. Our next step takes us far from the monastery into the grand mosaic of empire itself. A story not of silence, but of power, love, and ambition. When you're ready, we'll walk into the world of Justinian and Theodora, two souls who ruled an empire and rebuilt it from ruin. The story of Justinian and Theodora, love, politics, an empire rebuilt from ruin. Imagine, for a moment, the heart of Constantinople in the 6th century. The city glows under the late afternoon sun, its domes burnished gold, its marble streets echoing with the sound of sandals and carts. From the harbor, you can hear the cries of merchants selling silk, oil, and spices brought from every corner of the known world. Overhead, gulls wheel lazily, their shadows gliding across the water of the Bosporus, where east and west meet in an endless exchange of color and sound. But beneath this grandeur, the city trembles. The empire is fractured by plague, rebellion, and the ghosts of old wars. And at the center of it all stands a man, a peasant's son, now emperor, and a woman who should never have stood beside him. Their names are Justinian and Theodora. Together, they would build, destroy, and rebuild again. Their love and their rule would leave marks still visible on the stones of Istanbul today. Justinian was not born to rule. He came from the countryside of Illyria, in what is now the Balkans, a land of shepherds and hard soil. His uncle, Justinus, a soldier of modest rank, rose through the army by loyalty and chance, and eventually took the throne. When that happened, young Justinian was summoned to the capital, a quiet, serious boy with sharp eyes and an unyielding will. He was educated among the scholars of the palace, learning theology, law, and rhetoric. They said he worked by lamplight long after others had gone to bed, writing and studying until dawn. He believed deeply that the empire could be made whole again, that Rome, which had fractured and fallen in the west, could rise once more in the east. He was not a soldier. He ruled not by sword, but by vision, and by one of the most unlikely partnerships in history. Theodora was his opposite in every possible way. Where he came from obedience and discipline, she came from the margins of society, the daughter of a bear trainer from the hippodrome, the great arena where chariots thundered and crowds screamed. She grew up in the noise of spectacle and survival. As a girl, she acted on stage, performed in plays, and sometimes in ways that polite society would later pretend to forget. By her early 20s, she'd lived more lives than most courtiers ever would. And yet, she was brilliant, sharp-tuned, clever, and unafraid. After years of hardship, she abandoned the stage and traveled east, finding work as a wool spinner in Alexandria. It was there, in the long shadows of the churches, that she turned to faith and found something like peace. When she returned to Constantinople, she caught the attention of Justinian, then heir to the throne. He was captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her mind. Theodora spoke with confidence, without fear, without apology. In her, Justinian found what the court could not give him: honesty. They married an act so scandalous that laws had to be rewritten to make it possible. For the rest of their lives, they ruled not as monarch and consort, but as equals, a rarity even centuries later. Their reign began in 527 CE, and almost immediately, they began to transform the empire. Justinian dreamed of restoring Rome's lost glory, and Theodora ensured he did it with both strength and humanity. He reformed the empire's laws, creating the Corpus Juris Civilis, the foundation of modern European law. He rebuilt the great Hagia Sophia after the old church was destroyed in a riot, transforming it into a dome so vast and luminous that visitors said it seemed to float upon light itself. But the empire they ruled was not peaceful. Factions known as the Blues and the Greens, born from chariot racing rivalries, had grown into political forces, passionate, violent, and unpredictable. When anger turned to rebellion in the Nicco riots of 532, the city was consumed by chaos. The palace was under siege. Fires raged for days. Tens of thousands filled the hippodrome, demanding the emperor's head. For a moment, Justinian faltered. He considered fleeing the city, escaping by sea to safety. But Theodora.com, poised, unyielding, refused. According to the historian Procopius, she said quietly, "Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Royalty's a fine burial shroud." It was she who gave him courage. Justinian sent his general, Belisarius, to end the revolt. When it was over, the hippodrome was silent. Tens of thousands lay dead, and the city, blackened and broken, began to rebuild. In the years that followed, Justinian's ambition knew no rest. He sent armies to reclaim the lost provinces of the Western Empire: North Africa, Italy, parts of Spain. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed as though Rome had been reborn. Mosaics from Ravenna still show his face, calm/stern, crowned in gold, eyes fixed not on this world, but eternity. But empire has a cost. Wars drained the treasury. Plagues swept through the cities, leaving them silent, Except for the cries of the dying, the people of Constantinople whispered that God himself had grown weary of human pride. And through it all, Theodora remained a steady presence in the palace of marble and mosaics. She used her influence to protect women and the poor, passing laws that banned human trafficking, expanded rights for divorce, and provided refuge for women cast out by society. In an age when most women were invisible, she stood at the emperor's side. Visible, formidable, unforgettable. Their love, though tested, endured. Even in the rare surviving records, you can sense it in the tone of letters, in the choices they made, in the quiet defiance of their union. They were, in many ways, an empire within an empire, the spiritual and the political, intertwined like the golden threads in a Byzantine tapestry. When Theodora died, likely of cancer, Justinian never remarried. He continued to rule, surrounded by wealth and silence. But those who knew him said something in him had dimmed, as though the light from the Hagia Sophia had shifted, hoosed slightly. He ruled for nearly 40 years, and when he died, the empire he left was both vast and fragile, brilliant, yet brittle. Like the mosaics that decorated his capital, breathtaking from a distance, but fragile when touched. Their story endures, not just in history books, but in the stones of Istanbul, in the vast dome of Hagia Sophia, in the quiet mosaics that shimmer like frozen sunlight, and in the faint echo of footsteps across marble halls once filled with whispers of power, love, and loss. Their empire may have faded, but their world and the strange balance of faith and ambition that defined it still lingers in every shadowed archway, every broken column, every flicker of gold in the half-light. Pause. Now, as the city sleeps and the sea breathes softly against its walls, we leave the palace behind and descend into another kind of beauty, one painted, gilded, and worshipped. A beauty that sparked devotion and destruction. Icons and illumination, the beauty and controversy of sacred art. The empire may have stood upon armies and marble, but its soul was painted in gold. Step softly now. The streets outside the great palace fade into silence, and before us rises a small chapel, hidden between stone walls and courtyards where ivy creeps through cracks. Inside, the air smells faintly of wax and cedar. A single lamp burns before an icon, its flame trembling, alive. The face that gazes back from the wooden panel is both human and divine. Not a portrait, not quite an image, but something in between. In Byzantium, art was not just decoration, it was a doorway. To paint an icon was to pray with your hands. Every stroke was a confession, every color a sermon. Gold leaf symbolized the light of heaven, deep blue, the infinity of the divine. Red, the blood of sacrifice and power. Artists, or rather iconographers, did not sign their names. Their work was meant to transcend the self. It was not about fame, but faith, and yet, this faith would ignite a fire that burned across centuries. Let's begin with the act of creation itself. An icon painter would prepare a wooden board, often cypress, chosen for its purity. They would cover it with linen and coat it in a layer of white gesso, smooth as marble. Then, in silence, they would begin. Eyes first. Always the eyes, because the icon was said to look back at the one who looked upon it. It was not merely art. It was believed to contain presence, a window through which the holy could gaze into the human world. In dark chapels and flickering candlelight, that presence felt real. People whispered prayers, touched the painted faces, wept before them. Some said miracles happened, a tear appearing on the virgin's cheek, a halo glowing faintly in the night. To the faithful, these were signs of the divine. To others, they were dangerous illusions. By the 8th century, that tension would explode into one of the most profound religious conflicts in Christian history, the iconoclast controversy, the war on images. It began with a question whispered in fear. Can God be painted? If Christ was divine, then to depict him, to capture his face with earthly pigments, might be blasphemy. Idolatry, a return to the pagan temples of Greece and Rome. Emperors took sides. In 726 CE, Emperor Leo III ordered the removal of all icons from churches. Mosaics were smashed, frescoes whitewashed, saints' faces scraped away by trembling hands. Monks hid their paintings in caves and catacombs, wrapping them in linen and whispering prayers as soldiers marched above. For over a century, icons would become the battleground of the empire's soul. But iconoclasm was not just a theological war. It was political. Icons were powerful, not only as objects of faith but as symbols of authority. To control what people could see, to define what was holy, was to control belief itself. And so emperors who feared the church's influence sought to destroy what the people adored. Yet for every wall that was scrubbed clean, another secret room glowed with hidden art. In remote monasteries, far from the capital, iconographers continued their work, painting not for the empire, but for eternity. Each brushstroke was rebellion, each image a whispered act of devotion. Then, one woman changed everything. Her name was Empress Irene. In 787 CE, she called the Second Council of Nicaea, gathering bishops and theologians from across the empire. There, amid the heated debates, she restored the veneration of icons, declaring that to honor them was not idolatry, but a form of love. Not worship of the image, but worship through it. The icons returned. Walls once bare came alive again, filled with gold, blue, and crimson. Faces of saints emerged from silence, and when the faithful entered their churches, they wept to see the divine staring back once more. The golden age of Byzantine art followed, from Constantinople to Sinai, from Ravenna to Kiev. The world shimmered with sacred color. Mosaics covered domes like constellations made by human hands. Manuscripts glowed with tiny scenes, angels bending over letters of gold, kings kneeling before Christ enthroned. Every monastery became a workshop of eternity. Even the light itself seemed different, softer, more reverent, as though the air remembered prayer. But art, like empire, is fragile. By the time the Crusaders sacked Constantinople in 1204, many icons were stolen, burned, or melted for gold. Others were carried west, inspiring the first great artists of the Renaissance: Giotto, Fra, Angelico, and beyond. The Byzantines had given the world not only their theology, but their vision, a way of seeing the divine in human form, the eternal and the ordinary. Centuries later, in a quiet museum or candlelit church, you can still feel it, that strange mixture of awe and tenderness. Stand before an icon, and you are not just looking at paint. You are standing where countless others once stood, whispering prayers into the same silence. The faces are calm, almost otherworldly, their eyes wide and knowing. They do not merely ask for faith. They return Italiano. As night settles over Constantinople, the glow of those painted saints still lingers faint, like embers beneath ash. They survived empire, war, and heresy, and their gaze remains unbroken. Because perhaps, in the end, that was Byzantium's greatest gift to history. A vision of beauty not made for pleasure, but for eternity. Inside the great palace of Constantinople, mosaics, whispers, and imperial solitude. The streets beyond the palace walls have long since fallen silent. The city sleeps its domes, glinting faintly beneath the moon, its narrow alleys cooling after the day's heat. And yet, behind the thick marble walls of the great palace of Constantinople, a few lamps still burn. Here, the empire breathes in gold. Imagine yourself walking along the chalk gate, the great bronze doors at the palace's western entrance. They opened not with ceremony, but with a heavy whisper, the sigh of metal and age. Beyond them lies a world apart. Corridors paved with porphyry stone, walls shimmering with mosaics of glass and silver. Every step echoes softly beneath high ceilings painted with stars. The scent of beeswax and incense drifts through the air. Outside, the city lives in shadow and labor. Inside, time itself seems to move more slowly, as though luxury could still the ticking of the world. The great palace was not a single building, but a labyrinth of courtyards, fountains, and private chambers. A city within a city, covering more than 200,000 square meters at its height. Its holes were designed not only for comfort, but for visitors entering the hall of Chrysatriklinos. The golden reception hall found themselves beneath a dome so bright with gold tesserae that the air seemed filled with sunlight, even at dusk. On the walls, saints, emperors, and angels mingled in a silent hierarchy, the heavenly court reflected in the earthly one. At the center of it all sat the emperor himself, upon a mechanical throne of bronze and gold. It could rise and descend, and mechanical lions flanked it, their mouths opening in a low growl of hydraulics and steam. Foreign ambassadors stood frozen as the throne lifted, the emperor appearing as though elevated by divine power. To approach him was to step, symbolically, into heaven itself. But heaven, as the Byzantines knew well, had its shadows. Beneath the splendor, the palace was a web of whispers. Eunuchs glided through corridors on soft sandals, their voices hushed. Pages carried scrolls, sealed with wax, disappearing into secret doors. Courtiers and generals exchanged glances heavy with calculation. Every word might be overheard. Every loyalty was conditional. And behind a golden lattice or a curtain of silk, someone was always listening. The empire was held together not only by armies and trade, but by rumor, flattery, and fear. In the emperor's private chamber, the Daphne Palaceau was quiet now. The lamps burned low. The mosaics on the walls shimmered faintly. Scenes of Christ Pantocrator, of saints in robes of sapphire and green. In the stillness, the sound of a quill could be heard, scratching softly upon parchment, a scribe recording the day's decrees. The ink thick, almost black, glinting faintly like obsidian in the lamplight. The emperor might walk these halls alone, even surrounded by servants and guards. He was, in a way, solitary. He ruled an empire that stretched across seas, mountains, and deserts. And yet, his footsteps echoed in empty corridors. He carried the weight of divinity upon his shoulders, and no one, not even an empress, could ever truly share it. Outside, the Augustaion Square gleamed in the moonlight. Merchant stalls stood empty, their wares covered with cloth. The distant murmur of the Bosporus drifted through the night, the slow rhythm of waves against stone. A night watchman passed beneath the hippodrome, his torch a flicker in the darkness. Somewhere, far below, the cisterns sighed. Vast underground chambers filled with still water, their ceilings supported by endless ranks of marble columns. Even the foundations of the palace were silent witnesses. Above ground in the Emperor's banquet hall, golden plates still glimmered faintly beneath extinguished candles. The scent of roasted meat, of wine and honey, lingered in the air. Music had played here earlier, soft lyres, flutes, and the low hum of men singing in Greek and Syriac. Now, only the memory of melody remained. The feast was over, but in Byzantium, indulgence and faith walked hand in hand. To dine in the great palace was not simply to eat. It was to enact the order of the cosmos. Every guest had a place, determined by rank, by birth, by favor. The emperor sat at the center, surrounded by icons, gold, and protocol. Even the dishes themselves carried symbolism. Peacocks for eternity, fish for faith, pomegranates for resurrection. In every movement, the empire's theology was reaffirmed. And yet, beneath all the ritual and richness, there lingered a quiet melancholy. Perhaps the Byzantines knew, deep down, that all glory fades, that marble cracks, that gold dulls, that even the grandest throne stands upon dust. Imagine, now, standing in one of the empty halls at dawn. Light filters through a lattice window, catching the dust in the air, tiny golden motes swirling like stars. The walls still shimmer faintly with mosaics, angels with solemn eyes, their wings caught mid-motion, frozen in eternal vigilance. The sound of the city begins to rise, the call of merchants, the cries of gulls above the harbor, and the first toll of a church bell across the water. The empire wakes again, but its heart, within these walls, beats slowly, as if reluctant to return to the noise of life. Here, time lingers. Here, every step echoes with the memory of emperors, servants, and shadows. And perhaps that is the essence of Byzantium. A civilization caught between heaven and earth, faith and ambition, silence and splendor. An empire that prayed even as it ruled, and adorned its walls not only with beauty, but with longing. In the quiet of the great palace, you can almost feel it still. The hum of 1,000 prayers beneath the gold, the weight of centuries pressed gently into the stone. It is not the sound of power, but of permanence, and perhaps that is the truest luxury of all. The city of Constantinople lies quiet now. Its streets, once filled with pilgrims, traders, and processions, are still. The moon glides softly above the Bosporus, casting a silver sheen upon tiled rooftops and the faint ripples of the sea. Even the great domes of Hagia Sophia seem to rest, their vast silhouettes blending gently into the night. If you listen closely, beneath the hum of centuries, you can almost hear the rhythm of lives that once filled these walls. Monks whispering prayers before dawn, scribes dipping quills into ink, thick as midnight, emperors pacing slowly beneath painted ceilings, their minds burdened with both divinity and doubt. And far beyond the palace, the weavers, the sailors, the street vendors, whose small acts of endurance built what history calls glory. History, when told quietly, is never truly about power or conquest. It's about the texture of living, the sound of sandals on cold stone, the flicker of a lamp before morning light, the scent of bread baking in a humble courtyard. These are the true constants of the human story. They persist even when empires crumble and mosaics fade. In the stillness of night, the past feels close. You can imagine the faint echo of church bells carried over water, the low murmur of chants rising from distant monasteries, the steady rhythm of a world that once believed heaven itself rested just above its golden domes. That all empires, no matter how radiant, eventually learn the quiet truth of time, that no wall is strong enough to hold eternity. Stone erodes, dynasties end, and yet what remains is not ruin, but memory woven into the world like threads of gold beneath dust. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you can let your mind wander through those empty halls once more. The mosaics shimmer faintly in candlelight. The sound of sandals fades down a long corridor. Somewhere, a curtain stirs in the soft wind from the sea. It is neither sorrowful nor triumphant, just the steady breathing of history, alive even in silence. And maybe, in that silence, you can feel a kind of peace. The same peace that monks sought in their cold cells. The same stillness that emperors chased but never found. The calm that comes only when the world stops asking to be remembered, and simply is. So, as we leave Byzantium behind, let the gold and marble fade gently from view. Let the sound of the sea return to your mind, and let your thoughts drift like soft smoke through time. Unhurried, untethered, at rest. You've walked through prayer halls and palaces tonight. You've met emperors, artists, and ghosts. You've seen how devotion and ambition built a world of impossible beauty, and how, in the end, all of it dissolved back into quiet. That quiet is waiting for you, to not an emptiness, but a deep, enduring stillness. A place where time slows, and breath becomes the only rhythm that matters. Pause, faint sound of wind, distant bells. Before we part, if you've enjoyed this gentle journey through the Byzantine world, consider subscribing to Boring History for Sleep. Each week, we wander softly through another chapter of the past. Ancient cities, forgotten empires, lives lived in silence and wonder. And if you'd like to help others find this calm corner of history, a quiet like or a thoughtful comment makes all the difference. Now, close your eyes. Let the echoes fade. The empire sleeps, and so should you. Good night, and may your dreams be as peaceful as the mosaics of Constantinople, endless, shimmering, and still.